War movies often promise glory, victory, and heroic sacrifice. Yet some films refuse to protect audiences from the truth. They arrived in cinemas like shockwaves, governments panicked, censors reacted instantly. Screenings were banned before many viewers ever saw them. These movies did not celebrate battle. They exposed the darkest corners of human conflict. What you are about to see are 15 war films so brutally honest that many countries tried to hide them. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. War movies often promise bravery, sacrifice, and battlefield heroism. Men Behind the Sun offers none of that comfort. Instead, it opens the door to one of the darkest chapters of the Second World War. The film recreates the secret Japanese military research facility known as Unit 731. This base was not built to win battles. It was built to test biological weapons on human beings. Inside the compound, prisoners become test subjects for horrifying experiments. Victims are frozen alive so scientists can study frostbite. Others are infected with deadly diseases to observe how long they survive. The film shows these events with disturbing realism that shocked audiences worldwide. When Men Behind the Sun appeared in cinemas, many governments reacted immediately. Several countries banned the film outright because the violence looked too real. Some critics believed it crossed a moral line that cinema should never approach. Yet historians argued the film forced the world to confront atrocities that had long been hidden. Instead of heroic war mythology, the movie shows the terrifying cost of unchecked power and cruelty. Come and see. 1985. Some war films entertain audiences. Come and See devastates them. The Soviet masterpiece follows a teenage boy named Flyora who dreams of becoming a partisan fighter during the Nazi invasion of Belarus. At first, he imagines adventure and heroism. What he discovers instead is a nightmare that shatters his innocence. Director Alem Klimov wanted viewers to experience war exactly as civilians experienced it. The camera stays close to Flyora as the world around him collapses. Villages burn, families disappear. People run through forests trying to escape soldiers who show no mercy. Every scene pushes the young boy deeper into psychological trauma. The most horrifying sequence arrives when an entire village is forced into a wooden barn by occupying troops. And the building is set on fire while soldiers laugh outside. The moment is filmed with terrifying realism that left audiences stunned. Because of its relentless brutality, some distributors feared the film would be too disturbing for mainstream audiences. Yet critics eventually praised Come and See as one of the greatest anti-war films ever created. It does not celebrate victory. It shows the slow destruction of childhood in the middle of genocide. Cannibal Holocaust. 1980. Cannibal Holocaust is often labeled a horror film. Yet the story begins as a violent exploration of warlike conflict between cultures. A team of anthropologists travels deep into the Amazon rainforest, searching for a group of missing documentary filmmakers. The jungle they enter is already filled with tension between tribal groups struggling for survival. The rescue team eventually discovers film reels left behind by the vanished crew. These recordings reveal a disturbing truth. The journalists did not simply document tribal life. They manipulated it. They burned villages. They staged violent confrontations. Their goal was to capture shocking footage that would make their documentary famous. What follows is a spiral of brutality that becomes impossible to control. Tribal fighters retaliate against the outsiders who provoked the chaos. The film shows these events with disturbing realism that shocked audiences everywhere. When Cannibal Holocaust premiered, authorities reacted with panic. The violence looked so convincing that the director Ruggero Deodato was arrested and accused of creating a real snuff film. The movie was banned in more than 50 countries. Even today, it remains one of the most controversial and disturbing films ever released. The Beast, 1988. The desert mountains of Afghanistan become a deadly trap in The Beast. The story follows a Soviet tank crew separated from their battalion during the Soviet-Afghan War. Their massive armored vehicle was designed for open battlefield dominance, yet the narrow valleys of Afghanistan turn it into a slow-moving target. Inside the tank, tension grows between the crew members. Their commander Daskal is a ruthless officer who believes fear and brutality are the only tools that keep soldiers obedient. After destroying a small Afghan village, he refuses to show mercy or regret. His decision ignites a relentless pursuit by Afghan fighters determined to avenge their people. As the tank crawls through unforgiving terrain, the crew begins to question their leader. Supplies run low. Trust disappears. Every decision pushes them closer to disaster. The Afghan fighters track the tank across mountains and valleys, waiting for the moment when the armored giant finally becomes vulnerable. Director Kevin Reynolds chose to portray the conflict with stark realism rather than patriotic spectacle. Combat feels chaotic and terrifying. Soldiers on both sides appear exhausted and morally conflicted. The story explores how power and fear can corrupt even trained professionals during wartime. Because of its political themes and its raw depiction of the Soviet-Afghan conflict, the film struggled to find distribution in several regions. Yet over time, The Beast gained recognition as one of the most intense psychological war films ever produced. Johnny Got His Gun. 1971. A silent hospital room becomes the prison of a soldier whose life was destroyed by the First World War. Johnny Got His Gun tells the story of Joe Bonham, a young American infantryman caught in a devastating artillery explosion. Doctors manage to keep him alive, yet the blast removes almost everything that once defined him as a human being. Joe loses his arms, his legs, his hearing, his sight, and his ability to speak. His mind, however, remains fully awake. Trapped inside a motionless body, he begins to relive memories of childhood friendships, family moments, and dreams of the future that will never happen. The film moves between these memories and the sterile hospital environment where doctors treat Joe as a medical curiosity. Nurses whisper around his bed, unaware that he can hear every word in his thoughts. Inside his mind, Joe struggles desperately to communicate with the outside world. Director Dalton Trumbo adapted the film from his own novel written during the years before the Second World War. His goal was simple yet devastating. He wanted audiences to confront the permanent consequences of modern warfare. Instead of heroic battle scenes, the film shows the endless isolation faced by wounded soldiers. Many governments considered the movie too disturbing because it dismantled the romantic idea of military glory. Some countries restricted its release while others delayed distribution entirely. Over time, Johnny Got His Gun became a haunting symbol of the price paid by soldiers long after the battlefield grows quiet. Casualties of War. 1989. A patrol mission deep inside Vietnam becomes the setting for one of the most disturbing stories ever shown in a war film. Casualties of War follows a small group of American soldiers operating far from their main unit during the height of the Vietnam conflict. Their squad leader, Sergeant Messerve, believes the war has already stripped away every rule that once defined morality. After losing a close friend in combat, he decides to abduct a young Vietnamese woman from a nearby village. What begins as a reckless decision quickly becomes a crime that shatters the remaining sense of humanity inside the unit. Private Erickson refuses to participate in the assault. His refusal places him in immediate danger because the other soldiers demand silence. The squad believes loyalty to comrades must always come before justice. Erickson faces an impossible choice. He can stay silent and survive within the group or speak out and risk becoming their enemy. Director Brian De Palma presented the story with relentless emotional intensity. The film is based on a documented case from the Vietnam War that shocked military investigators when it became public. The narrative focuses not only on the crime itself, but also on the psychological pressure placed on soldiers operating far from oversight. The movie sparked fierce debate when it premiered. Some audiences praised its courage in exposing wartime atrocities. Others believed the subject matter was too disturbing for mainstream cinema. Several countries demanded cuts before allowing the film to be screened. Despite the controversy, Casualties of War remains one of the most powerful examinations of moral collapse during wartime. Redacted, 2007. The modern battlefield is often recorded through cameras rather than traditional war reporting. Redacted uses this reality to tell a disturbing story inspired by real events during the Iraq War. The film unfolds through multiple digital perspectives, including soldier video diaries, surveillance recordings, and fragments of online media. A group of American soldiers is stationed in a tense Iraqi town where fear and frustration dominate daily life. Patrols pass through streets filled with suspicion. Every encounter with civilians carries the possibility of violence. Over time, the emotional pressure begins to fracture the discipline of the unit. One soldier begins documenting life at the outpost for a personal film project. His camera captures moments of boredom, arguments, and quiet resentment among the troops. These recordings slowly reveal how isolation and anger can poison judgment. A terrible decision is eventually made that leads to an unspeakable crime against an Iraqi family. Director Brian De Palma deliberately structured the movie to feel like recovered evidence rather than traditional storytelling. The fragmented style forces viewers to assemble the narrative piece by piece, which makes the tragedy feel even more authentic. When Redacted premiered, it immediately ignited controversy. Some critics praised the film for confronting uncomfortable truths about modern warfare. Others accused it of presenting American soldiers in a damaging light. Several countries in the Middle East banned the movie entirely, while distributors in other regions limited its release. Despite the controversy, Redacted remains one of the most uncompromising portrayals of the psychological collapse that can occur when young soldiers are placed in chaotic wartime environments with little accountability. The film does not offer easy answers. It simply asks viewers to confront the consequences of violence when moral boundaries begin to erode. Platoon, 1986. Platoon emerged from the personal memories of director Oliver Stone, who served in Vietnam as a young soldier. The film rejects traditional heroic war narratives and instead presents the battlefield as a place where morality collapses under relentless pressure. The story follows Chris Taylor, a college student who volunteers for military service, believing he must share the burden carried by poorer Americans already fighting overseas. Once he arrives in Vietnam, he quickly realizes the war is far more chaotic and brutal than anything he imagined. Inside his platoon, two powerful personalities clash for control. Sergeant Barnes represents ruthless survival at any cost, while Sergeant Elias attempts to maintain a fragile sense of humanity. Their rivalry divides the soldiers into competing camps, each struggling to survive in an environment filled with ambushes, fear, and exhaustion. The film shows combat with raw immediacy. Patrols move through thick jungle where danger hides behind every shadow. Villages are searched and sometimes destroyed in moments of panic. Soldiers lash out at civilians after losing friends in sudden attacks. The violence feels messy, unpredictable, and terrifying. When Platoon premiered, its graphic realism stunned audiences. The film included scenes of torture, execution, and psychological breakdown rarely shown in mainstream cinema at that time. Some international markets demanded edits before allowing the movie to be screened. Yet critics and veterans widely praised the film for its honesty. Platoon did not portray war as a noble adventure. It revealed the moral chaos experienced by soldiers trapped in a conflict where clear victories were almost impossible to define. Born on the 4th of July, 1989, the journey of Ron Kovic begins with patriotic enthusiasm and ends with painful awakening. Born on the 4th of July tells the true story of a young American who volunteers to fight in Vietnam, believing he will defend his country and return home as a hero. During a chaotic battle, Kovic is shot in the spine, leaving him permanently paralyzed. The injury ends his military career and begins a long struggle with anger, guilt, and confusion. Back in the United States, he enters a veterans hospital where injured soldiers confront a harsh reality that few civilians understand. The film explores the emotional consequences of war long after the fighting stops. Kovic struggles with nightmares and frustration as he attempts to rebuild his life. The patriotic ideals that once inspired him slowly collapse as he confronts the human cost of the conflict. Director Oliver Stone again drew from personal experience to shape the story. Instead of focusing on battlefield action, the film examines the psychological wounds carried by soldiers who survive combat but return home forever changed. Some countries reacted cautiously to the movie because it openly criticized political leadership and military policy during the Vietnam era. Graphic depictions of injured veterans and scenes of wartime violence also triggered censorship concerns in certain markets. Over time, Born on the 4th of July became one of the most powerful films ever made about the aftermath of war. It shows how a single bullet can transform a young idealist into a determined activist searching for truth and accountability. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Stanley Kubrick approached the Vietnam War with a cold, analytical eye. Full Metal Jacket begins far from the battlefield inside a brutal Marine Corps training camp, where recruits are transformed into soldiers through relentless psychological pressure. The film introduces Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, whose methods are designed to break down individuality and rebuild recruits as obedient weapons. His insults echo through the barracks while exhausted young men struggle to survive the mental assault. One recruit named Leonard Lawrence becomes the focus of the story as the training slowly destroys his emotional stability. The tension inside the barracks builds toward a shocking act of violence that changes the direction of the narrative. After this moment, the film shifts to Vietnam, where the soldiers confront the chaos of urban combat during the Battle of Hue. Kubrick presents the battlefield with unsettling detachment. Gunfire echoes through ruined streets while soldiers advance through shattered buildings searching for unseen enemies. The violence appears sudden and senseless rather than heroic. When Full Metal Jacket was released, its disturbing training sequences and brutal combat scenes provoked debate among censors in several countries. Some distributors demanded cuts, while others allowed the film to appear unedited because of Kubrick's reputation. Over time, the film became recognized as one of the most influential war movies ever produced. It examines how military systems reshape ordinary individuals and asks whether the psychological cost of that transformation can ever truly be measured. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Few opening scenes in cinema history have shocked audiences like the first moments of Saving Private Ryan. Director Steven Spielberg recreated the Allied invasion of Normandy with a level of realism that had rarely been attempted before. The sequence begins as American soldiers approach Omaha Beach inside landing craft. Machine gun fire erupts from German positions overlooking the shoreline. Doors open and chaos explodes instantly. Soldiers fall before they even step into the water while explosions tear through the ranks. Cameras move through the carnage, following Captain John Miller and the surviving members of his unit as they fight desperately to reach cover. The violence is raw and relentless. Limbs are lost. Medics struggle to treat wounded soldiers while bullets strike the sand around them. Many viewers describe the experience as overwhelming. Some veterans who watched the film reported that the sequence triggered memories of the real invasion decades earlier. Because of the graphic nature of the battle, several countries debated whether the film required censorship. Despite the controversy, Saving Private Ryan became a landmark in war cinema. Spielberg used realism not to glorify combat, but to remind audiences how terrifying the battlefield truly was. The story that follows the landing explores sacrifice, loyalty, and the fragile value of a single human life during war. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. The streets of Algiers become a battleground in one of the most politically explosive war films ever produced. The Battle of Algiers dramatizes the struggle between French colonial forces and Algerian independence fighters during the 1950s. Director Gillo Pontecorvo chose a documentary style that makes every scene feel like real historical footage. The film shows how guerrilla fighters organize secret networks inside crowded neighborhoods, while French paratroopers attempt to dismantle the resistance through aggressive interrogation and torture. Bombings strike cafes filled with civilians. Military patrols sweep through narrow streets searching for suspects. The cycle of violence grows more intense as each side attempts to control the city. No simple heroes emerge from the conflict. When the film premiered, its political message immediately provoked outrage in France. Authorities feared the movie would encourage anti-colonial protests and inspire revolutionary movements. For years, the film was effectively banned from French cinemas. Despite the controversy, the Battle of Algiers became one of the most respected political war films ever made. Historians and filmmakers still study it for its unflinching portrayal of urban warfare and the moral dilemmas faced by both occupiers and resistance fighters. The Painted Bird, 2019. The Painted Bird is not a traditional war movie filled with battle scenes and military strategy. Instead, it follows a young boy wandering through the devastated landscapes of Eastern Europe during the Second World War. The child has no clear destination. His only goal is survival in a world that has collapsed into cruelty and suspicion. Separated from his family, the boy moves from village to village searching for shelter. Each encounter with strangers reveals another layer of human darkness created by fear and chaos. Some villagers show kindness for brief moments, yet others respond with violence, fueled by superstition or desperation. The child becomes a silent witness to acts that reveal how war can twist ordinary people into something frightening. Director Václav Marhul chose to film the story in stark black and white images that emphasize the bleak atmosphere of wartime Europe. The absence of color removes any sense of romanticism. Every scene feels raw and unsettling. The camera rarely looks away from the brutality that surrounds the young traveler. The film includes several disturbing sequences that shocked audiences during festival screenings. Some viewers walked out because they could not endure the relentless suffering depicted on screen. The violence is not presented as spectacle, but as an unavoidable reality for civilians trapped inside collapsing societies. Despite the controversy, critics praised The Painted Bird for confronting the psychological horror of war with unusual honesty. The film shows how conflict destroys communities and erases childhood innocence. Instead of focusing on armies and strategies, it reveals the quiet terror experienced by those who are too small to defend themselves, yet forced to endure history's darkest storms. The Act of Killing. 2012. The Act of Killing stands apart from traditional war films because the violence it explores took place during political purges rather than open battlefield combat. In the 1960s, Indonesia experienced a wave of mass killings after a military takeover targeted suspected communists and political opponents. Hundreds of thousands of people were murdered by paramilitary groups. Director Joshua Oppenheimer approached this dark history with a method that stunned audiences around the world. Instead of interviewing victims, the film focuses on the perpetrators themselves. Former death squad leaders are invited to reenact their crimes using the style of movies they once loved. Some choose to recreate executions as gangster films. Others design musical sequences or dramatic interrogations inspired by Hollywood thrillers. As the reenactments unfold, the audience slowly realizes how deeply these men believed their actions were justified. For decades, they were celebrated as heroes rather than criminals. As the disturbing power of the film emerges when the participants begin confronting the reality behind their memories. One former executioner describes how he developed a technique of strangling prisoners with wire because it produced less blood than other methods. The casual tone of his explanation reveals how normalized the violence had become. Authorities in Indonesia refused to allow an official theatrical release because the subject remained politically sensitive. Screenings took place secretly through underground networks organized by activists and filmmakers. International audiences, however, recognized the documentary as one of the most important films ever made about political violence. The Act of Killing forces viewers to confront a chilling question. What happens when societies reward brutality instead of condemning it? The film shows how easily history can be rewritten by those who survive long enough to control the story. Fires on the Plain. 1959. The jungles of the Philippines become a landscape of despair and fires on the plain. The Japanese film, directed by Kon Ichikawa, tells the story of a starving soldier named Tamura during the final months of the Second World War. His army unit has collapsed under constant pressure from advancing Allied forces. Tamura suffers from illness and weakness, which makes him a burden to his own commanders. They refuse to keep him with the unit unless he returns with proof that he can still fight. With nowhere else to go, he wanders through the jungle searching for food, medicine, and a reason to stay alive. Along the way, he encounters scattered groups of soldiers who have also been abandoned by the war. Discipline has disappeared. Hunger drives men toward desperate acts that would once have been unimaginable. The line between survival and madness begins to fade. Director Ichikawa presents the landscape as both beautiful and terrifying. Tall grass sways in the wind while distant gunfire echoes across empty hills. Yet beneath this quiet scenery lies a growing sense of horror. Soldiers who cannot find food begin to consider the unthinkable. Rumors of cannibalism spread through the starving survivors. When the film was released, many audiences were shocked by its grim honesty. Japanese war movies of the time often focused on sacrifice and patriotism. Fires on the plain instead exposed the physical and psychological collapse of soldiers trapped in a losing war. Censors in several countries debated whether the film was too disturbing for public viewing because of its bleak portrayal of starvation and moral breakdown. Over time, however, critics recognized it as one of the most powerful anti-war films ever made. The movie shows that war does not only destroy nations, it can slowly dismantle the humanity of those forced to endure it. These films prove that war cinema is not always entertainment. Sometimes it becomes a warning. The stories you just heard show how violence can reshape humanity itself. If you discovered a film here that shocked you, leave a comment below and subscribe for more hidden history from cinema.